So welcome to the abbreviated online in-person Erlang Elixir meetup. I am recording this. I'm going to hopefully put it on YouTube so other people can see it and everyone will remember how amazing it is. I know Jeffrey will be speaking. I'm not sure, Jeff, if you were like in on the deal or not, but okay, feel free to tell us what you want to tell us and chime in as you like. So without further ado, since we're like a little late here, I'm just going to hand it over to Jeffrey.
Awesome. Hey folks, give me just a second to share my screen. I'm looking for Zoom right now because that's there you are. Okay, I found you. All right. So hey folks, we're going to talk about a very small testing library called Checkered. I was lucky enough to get to co-author it with Jeff Smith, who is present with us. Yay! It was something that had been just building and kind of evolving over time, and at some point we stopped and actually started writing tests for it and turned it into its own thing. We've actually been using the proper package version of it internally at community since like January of this year. December of last year, January of this year of 2022. But it honestly was pretty much a drop-in replacement for code we've been using for 4+ years now. So we'll go through it and talk about where it helps, and it'll give us an opportunity to talk about a little bit of test theory as well, or just kind of how to make our tests a little bit more robust. Real fast though, as I mentioned, Jeff Smith, who's here, is co-author. If you want to follow him in the Fediverse Mastodon world, he's Cooler Ranch at dads.cool. I kind of wish I'd been aware of dads.cool before I set myself up as idle hands at mastodon.social. I suppose it's not too late. But and then from there, we're going to go. Y'all can still see my screen. We're looking at the Checkered repo now, right? Yes?
We're just looking at VS Code.
Freaking Zoom. Thank you. Let's try this again. All right. How about now?
I can see GitHub.
Oh, see, such a good co-pilot, such a good pair. Thank you. So I'll make sure that the information that you're seeing tonight is available to you, so you don't have to try and write anything down. This is the Checkered repo itself. We are always looking for contributors. So far there's only one issue, and I wrote it, so help. But honestly, if somebody's looking for an opportunity to do an open source contribution, this is a pretty low hanging one. It does require some work. It's not just documentation changes, but it's not super complex. We will dive into how to use the code, and then we'll come back and just kind of poke around so you can see that it's not terribly complex. Again, it's also available on Hex. So I set up a small repo to give to allow us to do kind of demo for tonight, and that is also publicly available. So I'll make sure that information gets pushed. So the first thing I did was I went and created a new Phoenix application, and then I used its generators to spin up a resource. So we have a context called accounts and a database resource called users. And so we can, if anybody needs, we can get into what a context is versus a schema later. But for now, just understand that the context, the accounts code, is the code that actually has any sort of business logic in it. The user is the definition of the database table and a change set. So when I wrote this, these top ones are actually kind of the standard tests that are put out by the Phoenix generators, and they're what I consider to be the bare minimum of tests. Now, to the Phoenix team's credit, I love that their generators produce usable real tests. that is not a thing that, like, in the Rails world, the generators would produce like empty test files. And so I'm much happier with this. But at the end of the day, I don't find it to be quite as thorough as I would like it to. For one thing, and this again, we're not quite on to Checkered Cab yet. I told you we're going to talk about a little bit of testing theory as well. Anything to me that doesn't actually change the behavior, any data in your test that doesn't change the behavior of the code under test, the stuff you're testing, ideally is randomized, so that you don't later find out, and this is a little bit less of a problem if you test drive your code, but what I've encountered a lot of times is people will write code and there will be a hard-coded value in there because they're just thinking through it. They're exploring their problem area and just kind of messing around, and they hard code something as kind of like a quick step. They get far enough along that they get it working, and then they forget that they hard coded that thing there. And then when they're going to create their test, that's the value that's in their mind for like test data, or for the thing. And so unintentionally, they've actually made it so that as long as their test is passing in that value, the code works. But as soon as it passes in a different value, it doesn't work. And so that's one of the reasons why I encourage people to randomize what I call incidental data. Again, it's data that shouldn't change the behavior of your test itself. And so you can see I was getting into that little lecture here because one of the first things that the Phoenix generator does is just come up with its incidental data is hard coded, right? And so, and the reason I know it's incidental is because we're passing it in here, we're calling our code, and then we're asserting for the same values over here. So excuse me. What I prefer to do instead is use some sort of factory. And in production, I typically am using Ex Machina, which I'm not in love with, but as long as you follow some rules is good. Is good enough. The biggest thing is, and I've got an entire other conference talk about this, but don't nest creation of testing resources under. So if I had if I were creating a user using Ex Machina, what I shouldn't do, if there's another structure, another schema that's usually belongs to it, I should not implicitly ever create any data under the hood. And as long as you stay away from that, Ex Machina is a great tool. For this thing, I just threw together like a small little factory where if we hand it something, a schema, it'll just run through the schema, grab all of the fields for it, look at their type, and then it's just got for basic things like it's got little generators, right? So we've got fairly randomized data. I often actually use Faker as a library to generate my data. The biggest thing that I typically do though is whatever my factory or test data generator is, if I am getting values, like generating random values to be using in the body of my test itself, I hide those things in a function in the factory and call that, so that I can always change the implementation. If I get tired of Faker, or there's a better option, or we discover that our data, our version of a phone number needs specific formatting or whatever it is, I can go do that, and all of my tests across the board are updated, as opposed to me having to go hunt down every place I was using a direct call to Faker, right? So anyway, I threw together this little factory, and so I've now randomized my incidental data. You'll notice I'm skipping fields these because we can't know what those are going to be. Those are things that are actually assigned by the database, right? So I don't mind that though. I had to add that like kind of as an afterthought, but it doesn't bother me because it works as documentation on what I'm actually expecting out of this, right? So I pass that in, I get the returned user, and this is where Checkered Cab comes into play. So with most things, I tend not to import functions. I tend to do an alias at the best, so that I know where something is coming from. A good example here is my factory is not even is not alias at all. It's just required. But even if I were to try and make things smaller or easier to write or more consistent, I would still alias it, so it's very obvious that valid params, even though it's just part of my testing suite, tools is coming from there. I don't checker cab I treat a little bit differently because it is basically adding a new assertion, and we think about it. We've been using it long enough. As I mentioned, about 4 years. It's the point where I've had 2 people tell me that they've gone to work other places and have tried to use this function only to remember that it's not actually part of the XUnit test suite. And that is actually one of the major reasons why Checkered Cab exists, is we were trying to get it out there for ourselves to be able to use in our own projects. But so the way it works, it's pretty simple, is that you call assert values for, and there are 3 required keys that you're going to pass it. The expected, and so a checker cab is fundamentally around checking maps or map-like things against each other and the values that they have. And so you're going to pass it an expected. In this case, it was our valid adders, right? We're going to get the actual, which in this case was the returned user, and we're going to deal with and then we're going to tell it which fields to check. Now, instead of having to list out the fields, checker cab also comes with another function called fields for. You can hand it an ecto schema, a struct, a map. I think that's it. They're all, they're all variations, kind of the same thing. But you'll notice in this case, I'm not actually handing it an actual map. I'm handing it a module that is the name of a schema. So you can also hand it a schema or like an actual instantiated schema or a map. So you do that, and then we have the optional key used here as well. This is called skip fields, and that's because we know that our valid adders doesn't have that information, and that's because they're assigned by the database, right? So running through this, we will. I just realized I didn't set ourselves up for a failure here. This is great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out one of the skip fields. And I am going to run I'm just gonna, it's like I forgot how to test without my little special Stream Deck keyboard. All right, so we're gonna run this, and it's yelling at me that the value inserted at didn't exist in the expected. So that should not be a surprise to us, because we just saw me intentionally failing this test, right? So what it does, and the only thing it's doing is literally just going through and checking, doing an asserts between each of the values, or the values for each of those things. So we'll get into a little bit more flexibility that it brings with it in the next example I'm going to give, but there are a few different there's one other thing I should bring up while we're doing this, and that's that typically, and it turns out that ID inserted at and updated at might be kind of an exception, but anything that I put in the skip, I ideally should have an assertion written below it. So in this particular case, I might want to validate that ID, or that this is parsable as a timestamp, right? Or that ID is parsable as a UUID. Now, I can kind of get away with that a little bit with the ID thing, at least, because the other thing I'm doing here is all tests, well, all code under test, the stuff we're testing is going to either have either a return value, a side effect, or side effects, or both, right? In this case, database calls actually typically have both. They return the thing they inserted, plus they've inserted data, right? And so one of the issues that I typically have with things like this is, like, there's actually nothing about this test that tells me there's data in the database. I could go write code, and of course this would be being a real pain in the butt, but I could go write code that would pass this test that absolutely never touches the database, right? That's an extreme example, but when you start thinking about other things that we do and other places where we're interacting and having side effects, it's not actually that uptight, right? It's important to think about testing your side effects and your return values. So in this particular case, now we have it where we're grabbing it from the database and actually just validating that it's the same thing. So our ID is actually tested here. What I'm still not effectively testing in this particular case is the inserted at, or the updated at. They also fall into the category of things that are so easily implemented in Ecto that I am not wildly concerned about them, but anything else that goes into skip fields, I typically want to make sure that I get tested. I know I've been kind of a nonstop wall of talking. Jeff, is there anything you want to add before we jump over to the user controller test?
No, I think everything that I was trying to anticipate you actually covered.
Haha, sweet.
I did add some extra flavor text into the chat, but even then, I think you still
Awesome.
covered it, like the distinction between incidental and intentional data.
I didn't call it intentional though, so I appreciate you even stating that. Yeah, so the opposite of incidental data is intentional. That's the stuff that will actually change the behavior of your code, right? And that should not be randomized, because then, well, there's a bunch of it's a giant world of hurt if you go and do that. So, all right. So from there, let's just get that back to where we should be fine. Okay. Oh, and just a heads up, for whatever reason, I'm unable to open up chat right now. So if anything comes up that's worth calling out, please just interrupt me.
Yeah, I can also monitor it if people are sheepish about it.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you. All right. So we're actually now going to get into the place where it's the situation where when I like that the checker cab and the assert values for function were really truly originally written to think about, and that was the scenario with controller tests where we're putting in strings so we're often dealing with a mixture of there's multiple things that are going on when you're dealing with a controller test. So often you may be dealing with the difference of atom values on the way in, and then the return value actually is string keyed. You can theoretically do string params in, so that's one thing that you can kind of get around. Then on top of that, it's important to remember that you're not just testing the database code at that point, you're also testing your view. It is in fact the only test for almost every Phoenix app I've ever worked in. The controller tests are the only things that are actually exercising view code, right? And so what I discovered was pretty common was that once people started modifying a resource, you tended to see that the controller test was just kind of stagnant, staying in place. People weren't necessarily adding fields or being very thorough about it, or even worse, a lot of times because they're so sure everything's working correctly, they'll just go say, I'll just check out a couple fields and make sure. So there's a couple different ways of testing that I've come across. So the top part of this test is just us, same thing. We're just creating params, right? We're posting them, getting the response body back, and I guess capturing an ID. I think that this was largely written by the generator, and I left it mostly alone, whereas this was, obviously me doing it. One of the things I've seen is people doing a lot of pattern matching to make sure that it's got those things. And so in this particular case, we know the three things it needs when we go and look at our user, right? It's got the age, name, we know it has an ID, and so we can assert that the response body matches that. It's also very handy to do if you don't actually know what one of these things is going to be, right? You can capture it and then do assertions below about the shape of that thing or whatever information you can glean. You can do additional assertions. So it's nice. It's a nice leveraging of pattern matching. Another one I've seen, and this is actually more common is a single assert line for every single value on it. But this, I've noticed that people tend to go this route, but who the hell wants to write a line for all 20, attributes on their model? At some point, you just don't care anymore, right? Or it's hard to even necessarily know you've missed them or whatever. But this is one of those places where I definitely find the most broken windows when I'm looking at controller tests is the assertions right here. Never mind the fact that neither of these is actually also doing the other thing. These are only asserting on the return value. They are not doing anything about the side effects. In our case, we know the side effect is it's still going to be writing to the database. We're doing something pretty basic here, just the basic CRUD endpoint, or in this case, it's a basic create endpoint. But what I've seen in a lot of controller tests in general is when the side effects are calls out to another service or, lots of more complex things, people still tend to just focus on the sign that this happened is, oh, great, everything's good to go. I got the right return value. So these are okay. I would work with somebody and try to convince them to think about maybe taking a different approach if I came across this at work. But I also wouldn't tell somebody they were an awful developer, right? Like, I like tests, I like security in what I do, and these get us most of the way. But one of the things that comes up a lot, one of the biggest use cases, is that we've gone and we go and we add another excuse me, we go and add another field to our schema, right? In this particular case, I cheated ahead of time. We already have the database migration. It already exists as a field in the database, right? And so actually, before I even go do that, let's just go run our test to make sure that we're on a good on an even ground, even playing field. Go away. Not all of you, you're all my favorite. Just ignore those warnings. I got to clean those up from apparently some other stuff I've done. All right. Actually, let's not ignore those. Oh, yes, let's ignore those warnings. Okay. So my tests are passing. We're in good shape. I've now gone and added a database migration. I've added my new thing here, and I'm good to go. So I'm going to rerun my tests, and test pass. Again, I'll clean up those things before I make this finally available. Those warnings. Look, my test pass. I'm good to go. I'm still safe, right? But the catch is that if this was something that was supposed to show up in my view in the JSON payload, return payload, I didn't catch it. So this is where we're going to come in, and instead we're going to add our third option, which is checker cab. So now with that,
You want to make sure line 37 is commented, Jeffrey.
Oh, thanks, friend. So with that, I'm going to show you, this is one of the places where we can be a little bit more flexible with the API on the library. When I pass expected, I can actually, it defaults to assuming that whatever you give it in expected or actual are atom keys for the keys, or atoms for the keys. But you can pass it string keys or atom keys, and it will understand and just convert over and do the, and grab the values from those things anyway. So this addresses our whole thing of like, hey, our factory produces data with atom keys because it's based off of the struct. But now we've got a situation where the response is coming back as JSON. So when it gets decoded by the test tooling, the Phoenix contest tooling, it's coming back with string keys, right? And just as a note, I like the consistency of the way that was written, but this would work as well, right? It's the same thing because, again, it defaults to atom keys if you don't pass in a tuple. So now that I've talked about this being so awesome and all that, let's see if it actually brings us any value. Oh, look at that. Favorite color did not exist in actual. And I go look in my actual, and it's my response body. Okay. Right, because my view doesn't have it, right? So let's go add it into my view.
It's pretty interesting that all of those other tests didn't pick this up.
And that's the thing, right? Is that and that's why that's kind of where this came from. Thank you, Jeff. Is that like we all work as fast as we can, as smart as we can, and as well as we can, but that means that we often just kind of skip little things like that, right? And a lot of times when we're doing code reviews, we look and say, oh, yep, it's got good testing. So like, I only have to be so focused on like, everything they covered. And I don't think those are fallacies. I think that that's our job, is to constantly be riding on the line of moving as quickly as possible and doing the best work we can. And that like, it's very easy to kind of veer and we get to the best work side and we fail to deliver, right? And that's one of the challenges that I've definitely dealt with in my life, in my career. Jeff has too. Not that I've observed that, but it's totally true. Right. And then the other side of it is that we get under a rush and like we go add that thing. And then next thing we know, we're trying to deploy code, still not doing it. And now we've lost a deploy cycle just because we forgot to do this thing. So why not have test tooling that just looks out for us, right? And so if we notice, I added it to my view and it's still saying it didn't exist in actual, but this time around it did exist in actual, but the value is nil. So I fortunately already know what the answer is. I forgot to add it into my thing for casting. So with that, I'm pretty sure this is getting a pass. It did. Man, I'm really suffering from this. I really wish I'd caught that sooner. It's it's distressing to me to have ugly output in my tests. So we are at a place now where at the very beginning, just having set the assertions for that up, right? Any code or anything I do to it afterwards will actually get picked up, because the one thing I'm sure to do is go change the behavior, the definition of the thing that I am passing into the fields for. And as a result, the rest of this is just dynamic, right? Now, to be clear, I really like self-updating tests, but you have to always start with a very strong source of truth somewhere, right? And so I don't know that I have it here because this was not yeah. So I would actually then also have tests that locked down this definition as part of my schema tests. And so as a result, I couldn't accidentally delete one of these without realizing it and have everything else stop testing it correctly because it's being dynamic, right? So I can maybe rattle up an example of that if we need to. But so the biggest, and then from there, just as a reminder, we also want to check the side effects, right? And so be really funny if I forgot to talk about that after all this ranting this evening. But so we want to check the side effects. And so in that case, here you go. You can see I just serve up an example, didn't pass the key type. But at this point, we're kind of playing the transit property thing, right? If our response body matched our user params and our in the database side effect matches our response body, then our in the database side effect actually matches our user params as well. But this also gives us the ability to make sure that our dates are inserted at and updated at and our Ds match as well, right? The ID is going to match. I guess we know that one already, but we'll just let it get checked. And then one of the other places though that Checkered, one of the very few options that it has is the ability to convert ISO 8601 date times over between the strings and the actual date structs. And so you'll notice I had actually deleted I'm sure you all witnessed me deleting convert dates true as an option. And so as a result, it'll make sure that they're the same thing. And so that way we have completely tested our entire payload without having that. We can see even, without having this here, that we've got the things we needed there. And so we have now made it so that we have dynamic tests that leverage the definition of the resource itself to continue to update. As a reminder, you can pass any group of fields here, right? And fields, so first off, this is just a function that returns a struct, right? Second off, so I could do, that. Let's say Bob, Sue. I can do that, and that'll be, whoops, I should have done fields for on that, sorry. Actually, we'll just do this. I can pass it a list, right, of keys, and it'll go for that. Now it should tell me that it's not, Bob didn't exist and expected. That makes sense, right? But my point is that I'm showing you the base case, the base use case for this, but you can actually start getting more. There are a lot of times, like for example, we will say, hey, I had this resource and I expected an event that was similar but not the same to be published. We can go create based off of, like, in the test, we can go create our expected, a map or something that looks like the thing that we're expecting as a side effect or whatever it is that we want to assert against, and pass that instead. You got to think about it and say, hey, will this catch problems if I change data? But it's still pretty flexible as far as that goes. So again, fields 4 is not required. It is there as just a convenience. So I'm gonna pause here, open up for discussion, and then we can just go look at how basic the code is, if we don't have too much to talk about.
Any
So Roland
questions online?
I'll say that Roland had one comment. He said that one line per field is screaming at me to write a list comprehension across fields, which is a low quality version of a certain values for it. Roland, you're right on the money. It really just grew out of that process and refining it.
Yep. I use a lot of list comprehensions in my testing. And so, yeah, I guess from that standpoint, then let's go.
Well, I wanted
go.
to ask
Sorry.
a question.
Yeah.
Well, draw attention to the point you made about kind of single source of truth. So the idea would be that you would have a specific schema test that tests each line of the schema in one place. So that you don't, and then because you have dynamic tests, you don't then have to retest manually that schema every other place where that schema is.
I kind of let myself down here by not having an example of how I test schemas. There's a really nice book you could go buy. Actually,
Who's that author?
Actually, if you
It's
go,
Andrea, right?
yes, Andrea Leopardi, very smart guy, core team member, and some other clown. But if you go, actually, as a note, if you go into the sample code, which is totally free, in the not skull application, you can see some variations on how I test schemas. They're not highlighted in the book, I don't think, at all, but there's a lot of code in the not skull application in the source code that is a lot of examples of things. And then I'll actually go maybe post recording, go pull open a file, crack open a file and show you how I test schemas. And I say that just because I can't do it without showing you code I technically probably don't own. So but from there, let's go look at the actual code real fast, and we can, when Jeff said that Roland was right on the money with list comprehension. So first off, fields for is pretty basic. It's just figures out which kind of thing you just handed it. And then if it turns out it's a schema, and like an actual ecto schema, it just calls fields. If not, then it just works through it and gets the works through it and gets the keys. But then there you go, Roland. There's your list comprehension. That's really all that we're looking at here. So it parses options, which is effectively all we're doing at the top here, and then just rolls through each of them and either converts the thing or not, depending on what it is. Oh, it may convert the fields to atoms. So what it does under the hood is it converts everything. If you give it string keys, it converts it all over to atoms. And then just compares them and just literally runs through. So one of the things that it does, though, that's worth noting is that and this is one of the places that it's not quite what we want it to be yet, is that because it calls an assertion, the first value you hit that doesn't match will raise, which means that you could potentially have multiple problems in the two things that you're comparing, and it's only talking about the first one. And so I mentioned before that there is an issue listed. That's actually error results should show all mismatching fields, not just the first one. So this is the next thing that we have planned for this, is to get it to do that. But again, it's not wildly complicated code. If somebody wants to beat Jeff or me to it, then you're more than welcome to. We'll be more than happy to support you on how to implement it, or ways you could go about implementing it. And that's it. Like it is basically, we kept finding ourselves using the same, like literally just copying the same list comprehensions over and over again, round between code bases. And it's like, why is this not a thing? So, and you know what? I'm gonna take a minute. I'm gonna stop my screen share. I'm gonna take a minute. I'm gonna find a good file, and I'm gonna show you all how I test schemas. And you're
Can
gonna
we
pretend you
take
never saw it.
questions while you're doing that, or
Yeah, go for it.
does anybody here have anything they want to add? Anybody there have anything they want to add?
Got
That's
some
all right.
ex-
I'm
I've
used
got
to
some
being
extra-
so good.
Yeah, I've got some extra info to add for flavor.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
And that is, so I put this in chat, but just for the people that are watching later and might not have access to it. I think Checker Cab walks a pretty fine line for not getting caught up on little nitpicky type mismatches when it could get in your way and it doesn't really matter. So I think convert dates is a really great example of that, where, you're typically going to return your date in the form of an ISO 8601 formatted string, whereas your database representation will be a date time. And I think another place for that would be coursing between string and atom keys, where we assume that they have the same name. I think those are points where it's going to make a test really, really fiddly. But pretty much every other circumstance, we care quite a bit about types. So it gets the sticky stuff out of the way, but still doesn't let you lose the plot.
Yeah. And interestingly enough, there was when I posted this, that we finally released this, somebody else followed up and said, hey, this is really cool. Maybe check out the thing I wrote that tries to address similar issues. And it was a library called Machete. And it was kind of neat in the sense that it goes the pattern matching route. And gives you a lot more flexibility, allows you to actually define things about, instead of explicit values, about what you expect the value, like the shape of the value should be instead. And I thought it was really exciting. I'm not sure when I would use it specifically, because it doesn't do the thing that I was doing here, or that we're doing here. I apologize. That we're doing here, where we're catching we are intentionally and explicitly obnoxiously trying to find the easiest way to make sure we test all the values, and pattern matching always is permissive about missing things as long as you have the bare minimum, right? And so all right, with that, I believe I have found a good example. Let me let me cool. All right, yep. All right, I wish Roland was here to catch this, but hopefully we can
Go
just
catch
point
the
it to
video.
recording. Yeah. All right, so most of my schema tests, and anybody I can badger into doing it, actually have a list at the top of the schema test that is literally just a listing of the fields and types. We have a tiny little bit of magical code that reduces the complexity of when you see an ecto enum, so it's a little bit more readable. But at the end of the day, this is actually the source of truth for what the schema is supposed to have in it. And if you change this or the schema, you will have a test failure. So you always have, and the thing is, we're allowed to do things. We're allowed to change our code. The whole point is to prevent us from regressions where we accidentally deleted a line. You know, I switch between Vim key bindings and just regular VS Code stuff all the time. And literally every once in a while, I'll have not realized I hit D twice or whatever, or there's some weird thing that happened where it snafu and it deletes a line. I don't notice it until maybe I get to git diff and I'm like, why is that deleted? Like, why'd that happen? So it just prevents us from being able to do that. But as soon as you have this like worked out at the exact, you know, and it matches up with your schema, then your schema can actually become a safe reference for anything that's self-updating, something, any of your dynamic testing. The problem is if it don't have something like this, and then you accidentally delete something from your schema, your tests all of a sudden aren't testing everything they're supposed to, right? So the catch is I've got that, we've got this, this definition up here, and then we actually just have a macro called validate schema fields and types. It takes the schema and then this struct. And so that's just written in our data case. And all it does is just go through and make sure everything matches. So field type is the thing where we're actually, I mentioned that we were making the ecto enum a little prettier. Otherwise it's pretty unwieldy, but that's it. And this is not terribly complicated code, but the whole point is once this exists, then we can actually use that through the rest of our testing. We can use the schema itself as a reference for the information that it's supposed to have. I'm not sure if there's anything in here that really leverages that. You'll see it happen a lot in like change sets where we're looking for the error cases, for example. So
I recall sometimes we use that for an instance where we can generate not whatever that type is to make sure that we catch that whenever we're casting.
yeah, and so that actually goes back to the little factory that I built here. We also in some places have invalid params for, and we'll pass it the list that I just showed you instead of a schema. This was me playing around a little bit, but we'll actually have data types where if you've got binary ID, it'll literally hand something that we know won't cast back, like won't cast to a binary back, right? And so we've got once you've got it locked down, it's kind of the I just realized it stopped sharing my screen again.
Yes.
Sorry, yeah, I appreciate that none of you spoke up. All right, let me
I was
jump back.
waiting
Okay,
for a
so
lull.
yeah, so here, like we actually have things, most of the places, if you see something like valid params for, it actually takes that list I just showed you of types of fields and types, and we'll go through it, and for valid params, it would match on the type and give you the good thing. On invalid params, it'll actually give you something we know won't cast over, and then you can do a list comprehension and make sure that all of those are actually correctly in the cast block. And so change sets can be locked down pretty well in a dynamic way that don't require much maintenance. So checker cab is just a little piece of all of how how I've driven a lot of our test patterns. And I say just to be clear, I'm the one who blabs about it a lot, but it's always collaboration with a lot of other folks, Jeff being one of them until he left us at community recently. So yeah. But yeah, so that is checker cab. Again, happy to take any other questions, or we can move on to discussion. And that, by the way, is what it looks like when you take a 5-minute lightning talk from Elixir and turn it into
half an hour, 40 minutes. That was pretty good.
and let me have at it, right?
Unstoppable. Nobody have any questions?
I had one quick comment, which is this, that style. I like to use the term like double entry testing, like in the sense of like double entry bookkeeping, where you've got the idea of like, why do we have that duality? It's so that, like you said, you could, every time you change one side, you have to change the other. So it's hard. Yep. So I'm just bringing that up because like, I think I'm the only one who ever uses that term, but yeah.
Yeah, I'll totally steal that. And if you're lucky, I may give you credit. So, no, that's awesome. That's a really good analogy too. I need to go learn more about it so that I can reference it in the future. So thanks for that call out.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's a neat idea because, in accounting, you've got this idea of like, you've got, when you debit one side, you always credit the other and vice versa. And so you always have this way of checking like, oh, like when you're trying to figure out where something didn't add up. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's pretty close, right? So yeah.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Nice library. It's really interesting to see, just to see how other people solve the problems that we all experience, right? You look through and you're like, oh, how can I don't want to keep writing this thing in a duplicated way, right? And yeah, turning it into a library, I think is a really interesting approach. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
At the end of the world.
Anybody else?
Any other questions, comments?
Nah, I think we're good.
No. Okay.
So I had a tiny little thing, which is just I noticed it occurred to me that you could probably be using, and maybe should be using, string to existing atom instead of to atom for that stuff, because the atom should exist, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I feel like we had an intentional conversation. One of the things is actually because it's in your test code, it's always a short-lived run of your application anyway. So
yeah, that's
from that standpoint, so something that people should know is that, and Jeff could definitely attest to this, I do not write my test code to the same standards that I write my code. Which means is like that I'll make some dirty calls. Like I would never call underscore, the underscore schema fields, like anything underscore, function name underscore. Anyways, typically, like if you're running that in your production code, you really need to be thinking about why you're doing that, right? Fair game when I'm testing. Like I don't typically do it, but I will actually go sniff out gen server state in my test code if that's the thing I need to do. There aren't many cases where that makes sense, because usually if you're testing gen servers, it doesn't matter. But my point is that like I don't actually hold my code to the same standards. I remember having a conversation with Jeff about string to atom versus existing atom. I do not remember why we ended up deciding on that though. Do you, Jeff?
I think I recall one of the reasons, and it is we generally catch something that doesn't exist shortly thereafter. And if we didn't do it that way, there'd be some extra ceremony for catching the error and then exposing that again later, where this is, I don't know, it's not like that important, but it's more correct.
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, like what I'm getting is you're sort of saying will catch the error better elsewhere, because you're not doing it because you're afraid someone's going to
Right.
like because it's test code, like you say, you don't need to worry about what you need to worry about in production code, but it's just in terms of catching that thing. And you're basically saying we're already catching that thing, so it's not the appropriate place to catch it. Is that kind of the point?
Yeah, it's more that we want to make sure there's a mismatch between the two things you're comparing, not and focus on that and consistency of the response. I think that
Yep.
yeah, Jeff, that sounds right. I think that's what
Yeah.
we saw that. Haley, we saw your fingers up.
Yeah,
think
I
that
just
was
can't type because I'm a cat bed at the moment.
like,
Yeah, so there's
type
two
on
things.
the cat.
One of which is if you do the two existing atom thing, the error will come out of Checkered, which does not help you. And you're debugging, it's like, where's my thing? And you're wondering, oh, is my testing framework, as opposed to just bleeding the atom directly to the test. And that doesn't exist because the cert fails, and then that's more obvious for when you're testing. Other thing is, we're all on 64-bit architecture. The atom table is gargantuan. This is not user, like, infinite number of monkeys making Shakespeare's and atoms. It's like, it's limited. It won't blow up the VM.
I believe it was Solomon who managed to actually write a library that tested the limits of the atom table for VIN number parsing.
He's admitting that. Yes.
Yeah. But yes, your point stands. Thank you for both of those. And that's a great call out, that if we had the issue with the string to existing atom and we had something that caused that, people would think we wrote a shit library as opposed to recognizing that we'd done that thing, right? And so that could lead to some debugging. And again, the whole idea is actually just saying, like, your shit doesn't match. So yeah, great call out and good discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you, Byron.
All right. Going once. Going twice. All right.
I'm gonna post the
Yes,
no,
Jeff.
this is a wrap up thing. I'm gonna post the link to the sample repo I was just demoing.
Okay.
That's all.
Yes.
I'm
Yes.
probably gonna fix those stupid test warnings first, and then I'm gonna post it. I'll do it before we leave.
Yeah, we'll fix it in post. It'll be fine.
Ah,
All right. So since we're already running a little late here, we have a member of our meetup who would love to do a little show and tell, which we often do for those who haven't done for a while, but we do periodically for you
Awesome.
new guys. So I don't even know what it is, but it'll be exciting. So I will hand it over to you. So please take the share and introduce yourself and tell us what you want to show.
Let me find out, how do I share on this? Because it's.
Zoom is
It's giving me a,
Zoom is horrible.
this guy. Okay, so you can type share. Sadly, I suspect you're gonna need to give, yes, you have to give yourself permission to restart Zoom. I think I have done it. Yeah. I'll be ready.
Yeah, no worries. We'll wait here. Anybody go to Codebeam?
no. Wish
I went
had.
to some of the virtual things.
how
I
was
didn't see
that?
all of them yet. Well, the virtual thing, like, there's a bit of problems with the audio and all that. It's the first time, I think it's the first time they're using AirMeet, so let's forgive that. But I liked some of the talks. One of my coworkers was giving a talk, Milton, which is how we're killing technical debt over at Adobe. So it's a relatively interesting talk if you're wondering why I make growling noises now and again. And then the other one is I'm really interested in what Boyd's up to with SLE4. So there were two talks on it. I would only watch Boyd's though, because the first, well, okay, depends on how much if you've been tracking Boyd's Crichton thing, the first talk is kind of a preamble that sums up the last few years and all of that. With some new data, but very little per se, and then Boyd has the larger update. So but if you haven't been keeping track of what SLE4 and all that is, then it would be better to watch the preamble talk, because I keep
Right.
forgetting I've been tracking this for so long that of course I knew some of the intro stuff. But it should be interesting. I look forward to trying to fiddle with a new way of kernel things. There's a couple other talks people spoke blowing up, but I didn't see all of them because I was.
We'll look forward to that. But yeah, it would have been fun. Looks like some good times are had. All right, so Chris is giving himself permission. All right, what you got?
Okay.
Can you hear him, by the way? Are you sharing your?
I don't have audio on because we were getting feedback.
Okay, why don't I?
We
hit
actually
them?
can hear you through Brett's.
Is it fine through my computer? Because I can.
Is the
Or is it
volume
better?
at which he was speaking was fine. If you want to move it closer to him, that would be even better, though.
Why don't? Can I just?
Now I don't hear it. Now we don't hear anybody. You're aware of that, right?
All right.
Ooh, now we hear Chris.
Am I? Okay, that's bad.
Okay, wait.
Yeah, go back to Brett's, please.
I'll unmute and we'll pretend.
Yeah, I think since your computer's driving the big speakers,
Yes, we could have unplugged, we plugged it in, but
yeah.
anyway.
All right.
All right, so
Woohoo.
I've been working on a project, and one of the side projects that have come out of this is a library called Selecto. So Selecto, there's two parts to it. The first part is a query builder. If you're building an ecto query, there are a couple of painful points. So for example, if you want to do an or statement or an or in your where clause, it's the where or, and it's just difficult to compose with. So this query builder allows you to pass in, simpler data structures that will then be turned into, the SQL that you want. And actually runs through Ecto. So it will provide a query for you that is compatible with anything that Ecto is using. Queryable, yeah. Right. So sorry, it does a lot of simplifying of the complex types of things that you would need to do in Ecto. If you need to make something that would require a fragment, it can do that for you. If you're making a function call that doesn't exist in the Ecto query API, it will do that for you. Don't have an example of that here, but the other part is a UI. Let me bring up this one that provides, based on your configuration, it provides a way for you to select which fields you want and filter them. So, for example, I have a couple of sample data sets in this example. It allows you to, build a query. This slide. Yeah. Wow, I like the drag and drop. That's pretty slow. And we don't know any other radiuses, but we'll say we'll just leave it at that. It will allow you to build the complex query with ands and ors and nested. If you wanted another or here, and another or here. So it takes care of all the dynamics and fragments that you'd have to do to build this query. And it does it either in the UI or directly in in the library. So so it also allows you to pick what you want to view. And I don't have it's pretty new, so I don't have a way to delete the filters yet. So I'm just going to reload. And there are two view modes currently. The aggregate view gives you a SQL roll-up, which let me find, let's see. Oops, that's bad. Okay, so so in this case, we're gonna make a group by with solar system name and the planet name. All the data is fake in this, and we'll give you the average mass, and you can see. So this, the way that this works, and I don't have the view working quite right yet. The roll up, it gives you one line, which is the totals for everything, and then for each of your group buys that you rolled up, it gives you a summary, right? And so so that eventually this will be, you'll be able to click this, it will apply a filter and then give you the detail view showing just the items from that drill down. So and then the detail view, you tell it, what fields do you want to see? So we'll do planet's mass, our atmosphere, planet name, and order by name. And it gives you that view. Unfortunately, I fixed a bug on the way here, and I introduced a bug where this is supposed to be the order that the fields display, and this is it's getting kind of scrambled. But this is based on something that I've actually written like 4 times in my life. I work for a vehicle logistics company, and I wrote this in Perl back in 2004, and I've been maintaining it ever since. And my thoughts are basically to make this as complete as the one in Perl. So one of the features that the Perl has is exports. So you can export your data in whatever format you want. It has the ability to save the queries that you make, and you can get a link that you can give to people that will build that query. And they can't change anything. They can't change what data they can see, but they can view that query without needing to log in or whatever. And we actually use that. We send emails out to to carriers who can click that link and then edit a form that's provided, cryptographically secure based on the link that they're getting. So, so all that is things that I have planned for this library. Let's see. I have a basic. I can't get to my tabs here. Okay, well, I have a live book that you saw. How do you tab switch and control tab? Nope.
Oh, in
OSX, yeah.
You just want to go between apps, or
Yeah, I just want to get rid of this.
if you grab it like there and just drag it down to the bottom.
Okay.
Yes, it's
All right. Yeah, so I've made a live book which has examples of how this is configured. So that planet view that I was showing you, this is all the configuration that you use. You tell it which table you're starting at, and which joins are allowed to be involved in the query. You have a required filters system that if you're doing like a multi-tenant system, you'd put your filters in there, and that would prevent people from looking at data outside of their domain. And then once you have this, which we call the domain structure, you create the selecto object, or selecto. It's not an object. I don't know what it is, but the selecto structure, and that will actually look at those __ schema __ functions to get your columns and your tables, stuff like that. But that builds a list of all the fields that are available for that domain. And then when you add a query or you're going to select or a filter, it will handle the joins for you. So if you have, a long string of joins, it will basically build those, based on what it needs for the query you're building. So, yeah, so that's what I have so far. It's very new. I put it on Hex the other day, and I'm basically hoping to find people that can help me work on this, and anybody who's interested, I'd really love to hear what people have to say, and if anybody wants to contribute anything. So
Awesome. Thank you.
this is pretty cool. Thank you.
So you're hoping to use this for work, it sounds like.
Well, I'm making a side project,
Right.
and I got the new Prague Pro book on building lists and live view, and I just didn't like how much text I'd have to type out for that. So I decided to go ahead and try this in Elixir, and yeah, so I might eventually use it at work. We don't use Elixir at work.
Right, that
We're
was
still a
going
Perl
to be my
shop.
following question is, how the hell are you converting someone from Perl to Elixir?
Well,
Quite a leap, so.
That's me, actually. So,
Okay.
so yeah, I'm actually the architect, so I can do what I want.
Good to be king.
I am.
The answer there. Okay.
So yeah, I might just throw this out there and see, what they say. Once it has, feature parity with the Perl version.
Sure, yeah,
then-
that's okay. Especially if you're gonna be maintaining it.
yeah. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I just wanted to say I used to love programming in Perl. Now I love programming in Elixir, so I don't see the issue.
Yeah, like, what's wrong?
That's good.
There've been a lot of pain points with Elixir, but, I'm getting through it.
Yeah.
so.
Nothing's
Not with
perfect.
Perl. With that?
Then with Pearl.
I had my pain points with Perl in the late 90s. So.
Right. You're over that.
Yeah, I'm past that.
Cool.
Yeah, to be honest, I enjoyed a lot of what in Elixir was actually kind of similar to things in Perl. That's a whole other discussion, but I just found it interesting.
yeah, I think Perl definitely prepared me for some of the functional programming, reduced type of stuff that Elixir does.
Wow. That's involved. All right, cool. Does anybody else have code snippets or questions that they wanted to share? Okay. Hearing no further. Yes, I will wrap it up and end the recording. Let's see if I can do that without ending the meeting. That would be good. I'll just poke all the buttons. How about this? Here, oh, there it is. Stop recording. You're right. Okay, so thanks for coming. We'll see you next time.